Nestled in the Pyrenees Mountains in southern France lies the ruins of Château de Montségur, a castle that served as the spiritual and political center of the Cathar resistance during the 13th century. Steeped in the Grail legend, I visited the site in June 2019 and had a distinct feeling that I used to be a Cathar who died there during the Inquisition. My travel companion seemed to have also had a past life there. On our way to the castle, we passed through a town known as Tarascon-sur-Ariege, also known for having Cathar initiation caves nearby. There, she suddenly developed an unexplained, debilitating back pain that only went away the next day. She was likely re-experiencing the physical pain of her death. In this video, I hope to cover who the Cathars are, the Grail legend associated with them, and specifically why the Grail was associated with the site of Montségur. To know who the Cathars are, we first need to understand the Essenes. The Essenes were a small, esoteric Jewish sect that were most active from 200 BCE to the 1st century CE. Compared to the other two major Jewish sects, Pharisees and Sadducees, the Essenes were devoted to voluntary poverty, charity, asceticism, and subsisted on a mainly vegetarian diet, with the priests taking it further by practicing celibacy. During the Jewish-Roman Wars in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, the Roman Empire took control over the region of Judea, current-day Israel, Palestine, and parts of Jordan, and likely destroyed the Essene community in the Qumran region. The recent Dead Sea Scrolls discovered from 1946 onwards in this region are believed to have belonged to the Essenes. Another set of documents, called the Nag Hammadi texts, were discovered in Egypt in 1945. Though not directly linked to the Essenes, these texts were mainly Gnostic in nature and dated to the 2nd to 4th century CE. These Gospels, like the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and Gospel of Judas, were excluded from the Bible canon. In a future video, I will talk more about the concept of Gnosticism and the content of the Gnostic texts. Please do like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if that sounds like something you would be interested in. Why did I mention the Essenes, Dead Sea Scrolls, and the Nag Hammadi texts? Firstly, I believe that the Essenes were Gnostics, and secondly, that the family of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene were Essenes and, therefore, by extension, Gnostics. The reason why I highlight Mary Magdalene will be clear later. Of course, these beliefs that I have are not shared by mainstream archaeologists and historians. Another reason why I brought up this information is that even though current Christian and Catholic religion seem to have a very clear idea about the meaning of Jesus Christ and his ministry, there were in fact competing beliefs on what Jesus Christ's teachings really mean in those early days. The Gnostics, a broad term for people who believe in the dualism of the universe and that our material universe was created by an evil deity instead of a good one, belonged to one such sect that holds a very different view from the Roman Catholic Church. Because of this fundamental difference, the Gnostics were constantly persecuted throughout history by the Catholic Church. A group of followers gathered around the prophet Mani in Persia in the 3rd century CE. Drawing from various religious traditions like Gnosticism, Zoroastrianism, and Buddhism, the Manicheans believed in achieving spiritual enlightenment, gnosis, to liberate themselves from the material world. Not surprisingly, they were persecuted by the Roman Empire and later by the Byzantine Empire. The founder was executed in the 3rd century CE, and the religion was banned in the Roman Empire in the 4th century. It took until the 8th to 9th century before the religion was completely wiped out, at least according to mainstream historians. In the 10th century, another Gnostic sect known as the Bogomils became active in the Bulgarian region. They were influenced by the Manichean teachings, as well as the Paulicians, another Gnostic sect originating in Armenia. Like the Manicheans, they were persecuted by the Byzantine Empire and the Catholic Church, and many were forced to flee to other parts of Europe. It is believed that the Bogomils were the Gnostic group that influenced the Cathars. Catharism started becoming popular in southern France from the 12th to 14th centuries. Though the Cathars existed throughout Western Europe, they seemed to base themselves especially in the Occitania region, current-day Languedoc in southern France. I believe that the Cathars chose to settle in this area because of its connection to Mary Magdalene. There is a strongly held belief in southern France that after the crucifixion, Mary Magdalene and her entourage traveled to southern France, landing in a place called Saints Mary's de la Mer, Saints Mary of the Sea. Important Mary Magdalene sacred sites in this region will be covered in future videos. From the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, it was clear that Mary Magdalene had a very different perspective of Jesus Christ's teachings vis-a-vis Peter. Whilst Peter took many of what Jesus said literally and took an overall exoteric stand, Mary understood what Jesus was truly conveying with his parables and took an overall esoteric stand. In this battle of philosophies, Peter's version would ultimately take hold, forming the bedrock of Roman Catholicism. In southern France, where she spent the remainder of her life, Mary's more Gnostic perspective would take root via Catharism. Cathars, being Gnostics, believed that our world was ruled by Satan. Our soul was initially angelic in nature, but we fell to earth through pride. The soul was doomed to return repeatedly to this miserable existence through reincarnation unless and until the soul breaks free with the help of Christ and the Holy Spirit to merge back with God. The Cathars believed that this purification process towards final perfection could be achieved over 7 lives. The Cathars were divided into 2 groups, the perfecti for women, and the credentes, the believers. If a credent wanted to become a perfecti, they had to believe that they had reached an incarnational cycle where the Holy Spirit could dwell within them. Even so, they had to undergo rigorous training of about 3 years. At the end of those 3 years, they underwent a ceremony that included scriptural readings and a ritual laying on of hands called the Manisola. From then onwards, it was believed that the Holy Spirit dwelled within them, and they had become semi-angelic. However, since they had to keep their body vessel pure for the Holy Spirit, they followed a lifestyle of extreme austerity and renunciation, including celibacy, poverty, pacifism, and vegetarianism. Doesn't that sound familiar? Yes. It's the same practices of the Essenes mentioned earlier. The perfecti would travel around in pairs, always with members of the same sex, to minister to the credentes. Besides ministering, they were known to be healers using herbs and laying on of hands. An important role performed by them was to administer what was known as consolamentum, consolation, to those who were dying, to ensure the soul's entry to heaven. The Catholic Church considered the Cathars heretical. Priests were sent by the Catholic Church to convert the Cathars and the people in the region back to the one true faith. However, it became obvious that it was not working since the people could see the stark contrast between the simply dressed perfecti and the opulently dressed priests of the Church. There were even some priests of the Church who decided to join the Cathars. Then, an unfortunate incident occurred, leading to the murder of Papal Legate Pierre de Castelnau in 1208. The Pope at that time, Pope Innocent III, what an ironic name, decided a more coercive approach was necessary and instigated the Albigensian Crusade, a 20-year campaign against the Cathars that was responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of people. The soldiers of the French monarchy and the Catholic Church invaded Montségur, the last bastion of the Cathars, in 1244. After a 10-month siege, the Cathars were forced to submit. At this point, they were offered the option of renouncing their faith or being burned at the stake. The latter was chosen by about 220 Cathars, who were then executed in a mass burning at the base of the castle. Even today, if you visit Montségur, you can see a stone stele marking where this burning took place. It's time to turn our attention to the Holy Grail and its association with Montségur. In the Arthurian legend, the Holy Grail was believed to be the cup from which Jesus Christ drank during the Last Supper and was used by Joseph of Arimathea to collect Jesus' blood when he was dying on the cross. In the early 13th century, around the same time as the events of the Albigensian Crusade, a writer named Wolfram von Eschenbach wrote an epic Grail legend poem called Parzival. The poem tells the story of a young knight named Parzival, who goes in search of the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail was believed to be kept in a castle called Montsalvash, guarded by the Fisher King and his knights. Eventually, after many trials and tribulations, Parzival becomes the new keeper of the Grail. An incident occurred before the fall of Montségur that caused people to suspect that this poem was pointing to Montsalvash being Montségur, and the knights being the Cathars. For Cathar perfecti supposedly brought something out of Montségur days before the fateful fall of the castle, a treasure that was presumably the Grail itself, and it was hidden in a nearby cave or brought to Rennes-le-Château. The mystery of Rennes-le-Château would be covered in a future video. Another version of the story states that a Cathar perfecti, Esclarmonde, the niece of the Lord of Montségur, fled to Catalonia with the Grail, where she eventually became the abbess of a monastery. A third version states that Amiel Acard was the perfecti who left the fortress on the night of its surrender and brought the Holy Grail to the cavern of Lombrives. Was the Grail a real physical object, an intangible symbol of spiritual enlightenment, or as stated in a recent concept popularized by Da Vinci's Code, the bloodline of Christ? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Note that if you do pay a visit to Montségur, the ruins seen today at the top of the mountain are not those of the Cathar fortress, but a 17th century French castle. However, it's said that the stones were taken from the rubble of the previous construction. Even so, Montségur is situated on a sacred site connected to the divine feminine, represented by Mary Magdalene, and even to earlier pagan times. In remote times, it was a sanctuary dedicated to the goddess Belicina, equivalent to Astarte in Phoenician theology and Artemis in Greek mythology. The construction of the 3 main Cathar castles in Occitania, Montségur, Queribus, and Cabaret, also followed a similar astronomical layout to that of the Egyptian pyramids. Today, Montségur is still a representation of defiance against oppression and a reminder of the persistent human quest for enlightenment.